It does, in one sense, I think, play to my mind that Justice Alito, in his decision, he said that Roe versus Wade was largely based on irrelevant or wrong historical analysis, none of which had any bearing on the Constitution. In other words, he was saying it was judicial activism at the time. And I think what you've said confirms that. How would you describe the importance of correcting or turning away from that judicial activism and trying to restore what we might call black letter law in Australia? In other words, again, more on the issue of who makes the decision than what the issue is.
Yeah, well, see, look, one of the problems that you have is that the American left today does not care about any of the so-called substantive objections to Roe. They just think it's right. But I think that they were wrong, and that it was very dubious at the time. And this is what the basic problem is. It's one of stare decisis. If you think a decision is wrong, does it last or not last? That when I was a student in England, this was a constant problem. And can you have a case which overrules the case that says you can't overrule cases without making that case overruled itself? And as I recall, just after I graduated from English law school, there was a sort of memorandum that came down from the House of Lords. It wasn't a decision saying, at this particular point, we regard stare decisis as a strong presumption, but not as an absolute. So we don't have to wait for Parliament to correct really egregious mistakes. And that's the kind of standard that Justice Alito wanted to talk about. So in his particular situation, he thought it was quite different. We talk about this case than all the other cases I've mentioned, like Griswold against Connecticut and the Obergefell versus Hodges cases, where essentially it was quite clear that politically same-sex marriage was on an enormously strong run. And probably today, if you put it to a vote in most states, it would carry in 48 or 49 states. I mean, this issue as a political discourse is over. There are just too many people, myself included, who have relatives who are same-sex couples, they have children, all the rest of this stuff. What are you supposed to do? And so it's become completely accepted. That's not true about Roe. On the metaphysics, it's the other way around. And so as Justice Alito does it, he kind of does two things simultaneously. First, he tries to trash the decision, and he's pretty good at doing that, explaining why it's wrong. And then what he wants to say is this is such an enormous issue, given it has to do with the status of unborn life, that it meets the egregious standard, so I can overturn it. The other cases do not. Justice Thomas writes an opinion consistent with his views that there is no such thing as substantive due process. This is once a liberal position. The famous, now deceased lawyer John Hart Ely used to say that's like talking about green shades of lovingness or some such thing about that, a contradiction in terms. And it turns out, Thomas's position. So he's not worried about abortion as such. So he wants to reconsider all the substantive due process decisions that have corrected individual rights. And that in turn, just yesterday, led to a motion in the House of Representatives to say, hey, we have to codify Obergefell because the Supreme Court's going to overturn it. That's 8 votes to 1 against it. But the whole point about this movement, at least on the side of the left, is to make it look as though it's much more significant, comprehensive, and persuasive than otherwise, in an effort to try and rally the force against it. And it's had its effect. I would say the approval rating of the Supreme Court has gone down. The last poll that I looked at had the favorable rating at around 38%. It's probably down to 10 or 15 points because the court has been taking an incredible pummeling out of this situation.